Hello, and thank you for joining us today for this webinar on Straight Talk on clinical trials, patient perspectives on study participation. And it's brought to you in collaboration with Informa Pharma Intelligence and Rare Patient Voice. I'm Joan Chambers. I'm the Senior Director of Marketing and Outreach for SysGroup, the Center for Information and Study on Clinical Research Participation, and the host for today's webinar. SysGroup is a nonprofit organization dedicated to raising awareness and transparency around clinical research for everyone. Informa Pharma Intelligence delivers information and data needed by the pharmaceutical and biomedical industry to make decisions and create real-world opportunities for growth. Rare Patient Voice provides patients and caregivers with rare diseases and non-rare diseases an opportunity to voice their opinions through surveys and interviews to improve medical products and services. The webinar is being recorded. We invite and encourage you to submit questions in the question and answer box during the webinar. If we move on to the next slide, as the host, I will start with brief introductions of our two co-moderators who will share insights from the participant survey and facilitate a panel discussion. As we move to the next slide to meet our co-moderators and panelists, it is my pleasure to introduce Mike Wenger with Informa Pharma Intelligence and Wes Michael with Rare Patient Voice. Mike, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Joan. Thanks for setting this up today. Really excited to be here with everybody presenting on this very important topic. Before introducing Wes and our panelists, I'll just give a little bit of background on myself. I'm a software developer that has been working in the clinical trial space for over a decade now. I first started at the Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's Research many years ago, and have since worked at several different digital healthcare companies and supporting other patient advocacy groups as they add clinical trial matching capabilities to their platforms. Today, I work at Informa Pharma Intelligence on a platform that makes it easier for pharmaceutical companies to work with a wide array of patient recruitment companies and patient advocacy groups all at once, and flipping the model so that they don't have to work with groups one at a time. I'm also a patient myself, having been diagnosed with a brain tumor in college and had a very fortunate prognosis many years ago, but it's definitely something that has opened my eyes to the importance of clinical research and moving science forward. Wes, would love to hand it off to you to share your background.
Sure. Thanks, Mike. I'm Wes Michael. I'm a longtime market researcher. I founded Rare Patient Voice 9 years ago to allow patients to take part in surveys as well as clinical trials. We now have over 100,000 patients and caregivers across 700 diseases in 9 countries. Today, it's interesting because we're talking about both the surveys and clinical trials, a survey that we did with our patients and who tell us about their experiences and desires in clinical trials. So it all comes together today. I think it's great. Thanks. Next slide.
Thank you, Wes. Great to have you here. And with that, Steve Jones is joining us from EUIPFF and is also a patient advocate. Steve, would love to give you a chance to share a little bit more about your background.
Yeah, hi, thanks very much. Yeah, my name is Steve Jones. I'm the president of an organization called the European Pulmonary Fibrosis Federation. We bring together 22 patient organizations from 16 different European countries, trying to raise awareness about the rare diseases involved in pulmonary fibrosis and supporting patients to get better care and treatment. I am myself a patient. I lived with idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis for 8 years. I would have died from it, except that I very luckily had a lung transplant 6 years ago. So that's me. Very interested in science. We do a lot of work with pharma and with researchers.
Great. Well, welcome, Steve. Ashley Smock, would love to learn a little bit more about your background as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ashley Smock. I am 36 years old. I currently am in treatment for ovarian cancer. I'm a 5-time ovarian cancer survivor. I have recurrent ovarian, so I'll probably be in treatment for as long as I'm here. I also work in the healthcare industry, so it's interesting to be a patient and see that day in and day out with my work, along with the treatment I have myself. And I'm really excited about being here just to give a voice to the patients. And I appreciate you guys hearing what we have to say. And I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Thank you so much for joining, Ashley. Really great to have you. And then Sarah, would you like to round us out and share a little bit of background on yourself?
Hi, my name is Sarah. I live in New York. I'm diagnosed with narcolepsy, with cataplexy. It took about 7 years of illness before my diagnosis. And I'm married with 5 kids. So between the narcolepsy and that, busy. And thank you for your time here today.
Perfect. Well, really excited to have all the panelists here today. If we could go to the next slide before kind of diving into the survey takeaways, as well as a Q&A, I'd love to just learn a little bit more from the audience. So you're about to get a pop-up on your screen. It's going to be asking you a question. Specifically, please select the response that best describes your attendance at the webinar today and what type of organization you're affiliated with. I'd love to get a better insight into who's out there in our virtual audience. So feel free to vote and hit submit. Perfect. So I believe everyone can see the results on your screen as well, but just in case that's not the case, I'm just going to walk down the line. So it looks like we have some great representation from biopharma organizations with 22%. 3% of you all are coming from medical device organizations. A lot of folks coming in from clinical research organizations at 17%. Clinical research sites, 14%. Hospital systems, 4%. Patient advocacy groups, 12%. And then I'm a patient, caregiver, or member of the general public, 28%. So amazing to see not just such a large audience, but a diverse audience as well, and welcome. If we can go to the next slide. As Wes mentioned, definitely surveys are a valuable way to learn insights and try to understand something. And so in the survey that we're about to walk through, there's several different insights, but one of the goals was to definitely gain a deeper understanding of the patient journey and to really try to understand for the folks that ultimately don't end up participating in research, but maybe initially had raised their hand and were generally interested, what led to tripping them up, and what were some of the reasons for the non-participation. And then let's see if we can glean any insights from this recent survey that we'll walk you through, and ideally identify ways for sponsors, advocacy organizations, and recruitment companies to continue to improve the enrollment process so that for those that ultimately do want to participate, there's a easy, smooth process to get to the finish line. One of the metaphors that I love to use is, I think most of us are familiar with the idea of a 5-star experience. You know, if you book a flight or go to a hotel or something like that, everyone knows what a 1-star experience looks like, and everybody knows what a 5-star experience looks like. So how, as an industry, as a group of different organizations, can we create more 5-star experiences for the folks that are interested in participating in clinical research? If we can go to the next slide. So we're going to walk through first insights specific to folks that have actually participated in a trial. So these are participants being surveyed. And if we go to the next slide from here, I'm going to send it your way, Wes.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Yeah, I love your analogy to the 5-star experience, because we're going to hear some things to how to take this from whatever it may be to a higher, more stars, right? And to help us all. So the first takeaway is physicians are key, or have been at least so far. Those who took part in clinical trials said in the survey that trial participation is most frequently the result of physician referrals. About half said that's how they found out about the trial. Twice as many as said they heard about it from patient advocacy groups. So, you know, we got to keep in mind physicians are key to get those referrals. Next slide.
Perfect. And so in addition to physicians, other ways that patients may find out about a clinical trial is through the government website, clinicaltrials.gov. For anyone that's not familiar, feel free to go to that URL, clinicaltrials.gov. It is a repository of all of the trials running and being conducted both here in the US and abroad. And it does allow you to search and try to learn more about clinical trials, and it caters to various different audiences, not just patients, but researchers and industry and researchers as well. And what was clear is that about 3 in every 4 trial participants have not used clinicaltrials.gov. So put another way, 1 in 4 are learning about trials through that website. So it is an important entry point. It's an important door to the world of clinical trial participation. There's been many recent initiatives to try to improve that experience. And I think there still is a long way to go there, but it is an important entryway with 1 in 4 patients learning about trials through that medium. If we go to the next slide.
All right. A majority of those who took part in the clinical trials rated the enrollment process highly. In fact, 80% thought it was excellent or good, and 2/3 noted that they were enrolled within a week. So that's a good starting point on our getting to that 5-star rating. So we're doing some things right in terms of getting people into the trials. Next slide.
So for this one, communication. So for the participants, they're definitely saying that the communication has been well pitched to them and well explained. For anyone that's participated in a trial, there's definitely communication at different points in time. There's the communication before you are participating and you're just trying to learn and understand and seeing if you qualify, and on the phone and hearing back and doing pre-screeners. There's those types of communication. There's also, while you're in the trial, things that need to be communicated to you, or if you need to communicate with someone at the site. And then once the trial is completed, there's communication that you might want to receive about what ended up, what was the outcome from the trial? What are the next steps? I'm interested in my own personal data of what it was like to participate in the trial. Was I the placebo and then the control arm, or did I receive the medication? And so communication could span email, it could include phone calls, alerts on websites. And so definitely sounds like it's been well pitched, but definitely with anything, there's always room for improvement to make sure that communication is timely, relevant, and for folks at those 3 different stages. And we go to takeaway number 5.
Right. Those of you in the pharma, representing pharma, please take this to heart here. Patients want to receive trial results. Of those who had taken part in trials, 64% said it was important to receive results. 88% of the potential participants, these are the ones who had not taken part but would like to in the future, 88% to them said it was important, but a majority of the participants said they had not received results. So it's important, and we're not doing a great job at this. There's certainly room for improvement in providing the results to the participants of the trials. Next slide.
A majority of trial participants would recommend and repeat the process. So I think that speaks very highly to the fact that patients get a lot of value from clinical research and would do it again. And just to share a couple of examples from when I was at the Michael J. Fox Foundation, one of the best ways to help promote the idea of clinical research and get people to understand and appreciate it was to not bring in someone from a pharmaceutical company. It wasn't to bring in a clinical site researcher. It was to bring in a fellow patient who walked through their rationale around how they thought about this decision. What were the pros and cons? What was the motivation? Was it for a better outcome for themselves? Was it to move research forward and for altruistic purposes to make sure that future generations and your kids won't be affected by this disease? There's a lot of different things that I think drive someone to participate and take this heroic act of participating in clinical research. And so for those that have done it before and have had a good experience sharing that message and broadcasting it so that folks that maybe were on the fence or are misinformed or just have more data points as they go into that decision. So definitely great to see this takeaway here. And if we go to takeaway number 7.
Right. There you go. If you look at this this chart, that orange section is those who came away from participating in clinical trials with a worsened perception of the industry. It's only 6%, so that is good news. But that large gray area, that 68% said their perception was unchanged. I think it could signify we're missing a great opportunity to improve the industry perception. Wouldn't it be great if the experience of a trial was so positive that it improved the perception of pharma? So let's think about that as we try to improve the experience everyone has. Next slide, number 8.
Yeah, Wes, I think that last one was such a good point. With takeaway number 7, I just want to add one comment. I remember working at the Michael J. Fox Foundation, and you're talking to a lot of participants about clinical trials. And I know historically folks have different perceptions when it comes to the pharmaceutical industry, negative or mixed or positive. And there definitely are some negatives out there. But I think that one of the things that was just really kind of a main takeaway for me during that experience was all drugs, all vaccines, all cures are only a direct result of the investment in the process that really requires the pharmaceutical industry and biotechs to be an active participant in. And so if we want that next wave of cures to hit the drug shelves, if we want better healthcare, they're a very necessary stakeholder. When they step out of bounds and they do something that is not good for the industry, we got to hold them accountable. But we can't just treat them solely as the bad guys. They are someone that is an active stakeholder and participant that we need to work with. And so a great takeaway there.
Good point, yeah.
For takeaway 8, so we're now switching gears and going to focus these questions on folks that have not participated in a trial. Maybe they were initially interested, but ultimately didn't end up participating. And so wanting to understand what prevented that step forward. And what we see here is 50% ultimately didn't qualify for the trial. That makes sense. Each trial has strict eligibility and ineligible inclusion-exclusion criteria that we really need to adhere to make sure that the scientific process is rigorous. Ideally, for the folks that were unsuccessful there, they got that feedback soon in their exploration. I think one of the things that I've seen is it takes a lot of time before someone gets the phone call or the appointment to say, hey, this isn't a good fit for you. The sooner we can give that feedback loop, the better. This next one, the fact that 21% of participants just never heard back, that's really troubling. That's something that I think as an industry we need to fix. If someone's raising their hand to participate, we can't ignore them. We can't deprioritize them in our call log queue or whatever it might be. So we have to understand that problem better, and we have to fix that. The next one, 70%, where the trial is no longer accepting more participants. That might be a tougher one to fix. There's definitely quotas involved and things like that. And then for 12%, there's other reasons. So definitely, some of this maybe is par for the course, but there definitely is a opportunity for improvement to make sure that there isn't unnecessary dropout when someone really is interested in moving forward. If we go to the next takeaway.
All right. Many patients do want to take part in clinical trials. 2/3 said they would be more likely to participate if the suitable study was nearby. Now, I'm a big proponent of decentralized clinical trials when they're possible. I think that would help these 2/3 who want to study nearby, because by definition, if it's decentralized, it makes it quote unquote nearby. 81%, so a huge majority, said they would be likely to participate if they were referred by their physician. So once again, it's critical to make the physicians aware of the trials and refer the appropriate patients, because they're such a driver of the patient behavior in this case. And next slide.
Okay. So for our last takeaway from the survey, I know at the beginning we said that the physicians were a big factor in helping refer folks to trials and increasing awareness about trials. Patient advocacy group websites are another great place for folks to search, learn about trials, ask questions, engage with that advocacy group to better understand the trial itself, as well as it looks like to just participate in a trial in general. And so definitely big shout out to all the advocacy groups that are maintaining those technologies and systems and being available on those phone calls to help patients as they go through this important decision. And we can go to the next slide. So we're now going to switch gears and we're going to bring our panelists in, and we're going to go back and forth with a couple of questions. At the end of the discussion, we are going to open it up for Q&A, folks that are in our virtual audience. So if there are any questions that Wes and I don't ask, feel free to start dropping those in the chat on the right-hand side, and we'll be sure to bring those up and address those at the Q&A at the end. Wes, I'll hand it over to you.
All right, some of the points that I was covering were how important the physician referral is to the process here. So I'm interested from your perspective, Steve and Ashley and Sarah, how have physician referrals or the lack of them, how have they impacted your personal journey regarding clinical trials?
Should I go first?
Please do.
Yeah, I mean, my own journey is that I haven't been involved in a clinical trial, even though I'm a patient advocate, because I was diagnosed with my disease, idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, when there were no clinical trials going on. And later on, my diagnosis was uncertain. And so when the trials were introduced, they weren't certain that I was a candidate. So I was left out of them. But I know from talking to patients now, I'm very actively involved in this in the UK and in Europe. There's a huge, the main source of information is undoubtedly physicians. I mean, I agree completely with what your survey result is. But we're talking about a very small number of people on trials. We need far more patients than that. And it does seem as if the existing system using hospitals and doctors to identify those patients doesn't seem to be working. I think we need to go beyond that. We need to get a much bigger base of patients than we do at the moment. And I think there is a role there for patient organizations to play. But
fill in that gap. Ashley or Joan, do you have, were you referred by a physician, or did that help or hinder you?
I did. I went to get a second opinion at another big healthcare system within the US for my cancer diagnosis. And there was a physician at the second opinion office who did talk about a clinical trial. But I think a lot of it also has to do with patient-physician relationships, because had my doctor at home with my healthcare system in Pittsburgh, maybe if he had brought up a clinical trial, I probably would have been a little more interested because we have a lot of history, but the second opinion doctor didn't really have a very good bedside manner either and didn't feel valued as a patient. He threw out some really nasty statistics and made me feel like I really wasn't worth his time because I wasn't his patient. I was seeking a second opinion. So he threw out a couple clinical trials, but I think because I had a poor opinion of how our visit went, I didn't follow up with him, even though I would have qualified for a clinical trial, just because there was no relationship. And I felt like there wasn't anything between us during the visit that was positive. So I think too, a lot of it has to do with the doctors that are encouraging patients to make sure that the research companies are saying, you need to build relationships with these patients, because if they don't trust you, they're not going to trust a trial when they don't know anyone. So I think the trust component has a lot to do with it too, when there's a patient referral.
Yeah, that's a great point, I think.
Yeah, regarding physician referrals, I think one of the reasons that it's so important to participation is because when the clinical trial is referred by a physician, there's a certain stamp of approval in terms of safety and suitability just going in. So before doing research and checking to see if you're eligible for the clinical trial, there's a certain level of trust that you have because it's referred by your doctor who you trust and have a good relationship with. And that can give the basic sense of safety in proceeding with a clinical trial and a new untested drug or medicine.
Excellent. Great points, I think, all around. Mike, you have a question?
Ashley, sorry to hear that you had the bad bedside manner from that one physician. I think the other thing, just to add to the conversation that I've seen with physician referrals is, in a perfect world, it's not a trial is seeking a patient. It is a patient is seeking trial opportunities. And I think what is tough is, as a physician, as an oncologist, new trials come online and offline all the time. And it's pretty difficult to keep tabs on all of that. And so what ends up happening is the physician might only be familiar with the trials that being conducted at their facility or that they're, involved with. And so the recommendation sometimes feels a little bit like a trial is being, a patient is being brought into a trial rather than a wider array of options are being presented. And so the one thing that I would just throw out there is I think the physician role is very critical to have that confidence, but feel free to ask your physician, what other options exist outside of this conversation we're having. Jump into clinicaltrials.gov, see if there's maybe more options on the menu, because it might not necessarily be on that person's radar as they're having that conversation with you. Great. So to dive into a different question, what do you see as the stumbling blocks for someone that's raised their hand to participate in research? They want to get involved, but ultimately they don't end up enrolling and participating. What are along the various points in time? What are some different stumbling blocks that they might get tripped up on?
So who did you talk to there, Mike? Did you?
You could start us off.
Okay.
Sorry, who? Yeah, sorry.
I think that when it comes to clinical trials, location is a huge factor with everything else that one has to do. It has to be at least a convenient enough location that they can get to it. However often they need to be going to checking in. And if there was a way, like as Wes said, to decentralize the clinical trials, to somehow bring it down to a local level, or even like a in-home type of level of not having to constantly go out to that location, and that's not convenient, that's going to be a huge factor in whether to participate or not.
Great. Ashley, anything you'd add there?
I think for me, when I've been interested in learning more about clinical trials, is a lot of times there's not research available for me to know how successful people have been in the past, because I'm going to go through literal hell on earth with an oral medication that's going to have all different kinds of side effects, or an infusion or whatnot, but there's only a 5% success rate of people that have seen improvement in their condition or something like that. If there's data that shows that, a great majority or around half, a bulk of the participants had some sort of positive experience or improvement in their healthcare condition, I think that would give me more want and value for being enrolled in it. But if there's not research and statistics and results for me to read, I think I don't want to go into something blindly when it's something that's as serious as my own health. So in the past, I just haven't seen the information there for me to read ahead of time and learn more.
And Steve?
Yeah, I think Sarah's point about location is really important. It's for people with pulmonary fibrosis, even when they're halfway through the time course of the disease, which is only 3 to 5 years, they're already getting very tired, very breathless. You've got to make it easy for them to get to the trial site. So in the UK now, we put a lot of pressure on pharma companies saying, you've really got to provide taxis with drivers, chauffeurs to take them to the hospital, take them back again afterwards. And with that, it's often the one thing that makes patients want to join. They know they're being taken care of and they won't have to hassle with public transport. The other thing is, I think so often pharma companies design the trials in a vacuum without consulting patients. And the problem then is that they ask for too many visits. Do you really need that many visits to the hospital? Is it not possible to do some of the tests locally to where the person lives with their primary healthcare provider or some other secondary healthcare provider locally? Can we really think about how to make it as easy as possible for the patient? And in the UK, we've got most of those pharma companies go to the same 12 or 14 hospitals to run their trials. And now they're all in big cities, so they capture a significant part of the population, but a large number of people live too far away to participate. So you're automatically excluding people who want to come in. And I think pharma's got to get its act together and reach out to those smaller hospitals in more remote areas and work directly with them. So there's a lot of points there, really, I think.
Yeah, points. Definitely in the transportation is something that comes up again and again. I think there's a couple of different solutions. There's the providing there's compensating for them and transfer. And for anyone not familiar, because I know Sarah mentioned decentralized trials, that essentially the idea of trying to get out of requiring the patient to come to the doctor's office or the hospital for every appointment, and having maybe some combination of using your local doctor or telemedicine or someone coming to your own home to take the blood draw. So I think decentralized trials has different makes different shapes, but it definitely is a very promising, especially in light of the COVID pandemic, where more and more trials are decentralized way or a hybrid way, where there might be a combination of in-person visits and at-home visits. So definitely a good thing for the patient community as they think about trials, and something we can continue to push the industry to move forward. Diving into a slightly different, so feedback we've received from patients, one of the big takeaways was that the clinicaltrials.gov website is not always the most patient-friendly. It's been a recent initiative to overhaul that and take in feedback and try to make it better. And there's a updated beta website that folks can go to now and take for a test drive. But get the panelists' opinion on this topic, and Steve, maybe we could start with you.
Okay, I mean, never is a true word being said. I mean, that website is almost impossible to use for ordinary people, I think. But I did look at the beta website that you mentioned to me the other day, and it does look as if they're doing it better. I mean, we use a system which you guys have been from CIS, CIRP have been involved in setting up a European database based on clinicaltrials.gov, but made more simple in plain language wherever possible to make it easier for patients to access. But we've still got a way to go on that as well. I think this is an area that we all need to work together on.
Sorry, anything you'd add there?
I haven't used the website much of the clinicaltrials.gov, but I believe that it's important to balance the information that they're required to provide to the patients and to the public, and the information that the patient wants in a way that the patient can actually understand and get what they need from it to make their decision on whether this is something they're going to go ahead with or not.
Right, and then Ashley, anything, had you had a chance to use clinicaltrials.gov, and what's your perspective?
I myself haven't used the website a lot either, but just to echo what was said before, using other government websites, I think sometimes the way that things are worded could be very confusing, and there's terminology that's hard for a regular person that's not a doctor or that doesn't use that kind of language every day to understand. I don't know either if there's good contact information, if someone does have questions, if that's readily available for who they can email or call or talk to get more information. But I would say just understanding what you're reading is really big on any website that I've seen. That's kind of a deterrent when you don't know what you're reading.
Right. I think the challenge historically that they've had is the website caters to different audiences. It wasn't initially built or designed with patients in mind. It was more of a regulatory requirement. And so researchers, industry, other folks, there's going to be a lot of jargon, and the trial protocol is going to, or synopsises are going to be there and things like that. So definitely, I think advocacy groups have filled the gap there a little bit to try to take some of the data from clinicaltrials.gov and make it a little bit more lay friendly for folks and easier to consume and easier to search. But definitely, like, there's continued need for improvement. Wes, I'll send it your way for the next question.
You know, one of the things that we kept seeing in the survey was the importance of receiving the trial results, somehow communicating back to the patients what the trial had found out. And one of our participants has a good follow-up questions on that too. She said, Audrey said, what's the best way for we small pharma companies to get the study results to the sites and the patients? So I'd love to get opinions from the patients about how important is this and what's the best way, shape, or form. I can imagine you don't want it to look like the clinicaltrials.gov website if you're trying to communicate to folks. But anyway, any thoughts on getting that data back?
I would have thought I mean, first of all, I'd say to any pharma company, if you're not already doing this, I'm really disappointed in you, because you really obviously don't trust and respect your patients. You know, they've given a lot of time to take part in this trial. You owe it to them to take the results back to them. But I think the easiest way is with a really, carefully written lay summary in plain language with simple charts that just gets the real message across, and in a form that the patients can then take it to their fellow patients in support groups and other places and spread the word more easily. So it should be really simple with a lot of work and effort. And I think patient organizations or your patient advocates should be involved in that process of developing the lay summary.
Good points. Sarah or Ashley, have you seen any data from clinical trials?
There was one company that I had participated in after trial survey to see what was the best format for putting information out to patients. And I agree with lots of bar graphs and charts or pie charts, things where I don't have to read little teeny tiny print of numbers. And I'm like, what was that out of how many, with a bunch of footnotes and side references, just something very plain and easy so that you can see this is this group, this is this group, this was a success rate, even for side effects. Like an easy chart is easy to see what was the most highly represented side effect, what was the least represented. And then there was also a section where patients had written their own little blurb about specifically how it worked for them. And they even had some personal information, like not, last name, but it's my first name. I'm a mom of 3. I work in this industry. I took this medication while I was working, and it made it more personal so that it made me feel like I was reading information about real people that reminded me of myself. So I think other patients on there too makes it more real and meaningful for me as the patient.
Those are great points. Sarah, have you been seeing any data about trials?
So I haven't seen any of the data, but like the others said, simple charts and summaries of the salient points of the trial would be very helpful going in, to know that at the end of the day, I will have that information. I will be able to get access to the results.
I mean, what's the best way to deliver it? Is it an email? Is it through the physician or somebody at the study, or a booklet sent through the mail? I guess different people might have different preferences. I don't know. There's a way people would prefer to receive this.
I think
an online presentation.
A lot of contact is done through, or initial contact is done through email. Yeah. That's probably the most practical way of, disseminating the information, giving information to certain doctors. It would not be practical, I imagine. So I think email, and maybe with a link for additional information if you really did want the nitty gritty of all the medical jargon, would be best.
One of just to add one point, one of the things that I think is amazing when it comes to, for instance, and I know this isn't rolled out everywhere, but some places have it set up so that you'll receive a text message when your donated blood is used. It might be later, wow. It might be a year or two later, but you have that positive feedback loop of, you did an amazing thing, you donated your blood, and you actually get to pay, and it had a positive impact. And so very similar, I think, some companies and some sponsors recently make that investment, create language summary, create even video content in some instances to try to explain the outcome of a trial, but then make it easy for patients to subscribe so that they can receive updates, and not just the plain language summary, but if you were in a phase 2 trial and that went the phase 3 hit it's finished enrollment, and when that phase 3 ultimately got approved by the FDA, like there's certain milestones and successes that I love to stay in the loop of. And if they have a nice way of subscribing to those things, and the sponsors make sure they're timely manner, that's a win-win for everybody. Switching gears for another question. Earlier, perception of the pharmaceutical and their in general. There's definitely some things that we do as an industry that are amazing and innovative, and there's some things that we do that just, you know, are not viewed in a positive light. Not to get into something specific, but I have a lot of friends and family members who watch the show Dope Sick, the Sackler family and OxyContin, and I know in being in conversations with them, there's the general theme of, you know, pharma equals bad, pharma equals profits and money, and I think there's cases where there's been really things that have been done really poorly, and but as an industry, there's the great stuff we do. Would love to get your all's take on just kind of the industry's reputation in general, and then how do you think COVID has improved or worsened that reputation? Maybe Ashley, if we could start with you.
I'm not sure if it was my system or not, but your question was fading in and I got bits and pieces of it. So do you mind repeating that? I didn't hear the whole question really clear.
Sorry about that. Is it any clearer now?
Yeah, that's better now.
Was around just the reputation of the pharmaceutical industry in general. And do you think it's improved or worsened since COVID and with all the recent vaccine work?
I think just because I work a little bit and dabble in that side of the industry with what I do, that with the Moderna and everything that came out, all the different companies with vaccines, I know at first a lot of people were really hesitant, but as more and more people are getting vaccinated, the feedback that we're getting is that people were slowly starting to trust the healthcare system a little bit more because they felt like this was something that was looking out for the general public versus jacking up the price of a medication for someone who's on a fixed income that can't afford it and has to pick between groceries and medication. So that's the feedback that I usually get was with the vaccines coming out, it improved the reputation for a lot of people because they saw how positive it was. But I still have an overwhelming majority of people that just the cost of things that's passed on to the consumer. You're constantly looking for grants and foundations to help you pay for medicine that you need to basically choose to live or not, is something that's really frustrating that I've experienced firsthand. And patient advocacy people at the hospital thankfully know how to find that information. But for whatever reason, the cost sometimes is really a big deterrent, I think, that makes it a negative.
Yeah. I mean, I'd agree very much with Ashley about the impact of COVID has been really to raise the reputation of not just of the pharma industry, but also of scientists and of science in general. Yeah, you've got anti-vaxxers, you've got people who don't agree with that. But generally speaking, I think people say, well, thank God they were here. You know, we're now 2 years into this thing and we're in a much better place than we would have been otherwise. So I think I would agree very much with that.
Right. And then Sarah, anything you'd like to add? Reputation in the pharma?
I believe that when it comes to pharmaceuticals, an important part to trusting the medications and vaccines that are available to us is accountability and liability for the products. If I know that when I get a vaccine or take a medication and something goes wrong, I can go back to the source. We can go back to the pharmaceutical company. They're standing behind their product, and there's a system in place for accountability and liability. Then I can feel comfortable with it. If not, then there's that sense that if you cannot stand behind your product, why should I, as a patient, as a layman? So I think that that system of the pharmaceutical companies standing behind their products, whatever it is, the medications or medical processes or vaccines, I think that's a really important factor in being able to trust what they're putting out there.
Thanks for sharing that. Wes, I'll send it to you to ask our final two questions. Oh, you're on mute, Wes.
Sorry, there was some dogs barking. I was just trying to save everybody from that. There's some great discussion going on in the chat. So if you're on this thing, look at the chat. There's a lot of great points and comments and links people are providing in there, as well as the Q&A. I'm gonna ask a follow-up question. One of the folks had for you, Ashley. You talked earlier about your initial doctor, but then he wasn't the one that told you about the trial, and you had different feelings about their different manners. And the follow-up question is, did you talk to your primary doc about the trial? It says, just curious if you did and how that may have made you feel differently.
When I did come back to Pittsburgh, I did talk with my main oncologist about that. And I think for whatever reason, it was only available at the facility where my second opinion was. And at that point, based on the opinion I had, unfortunately, of that whole healthcare system because of one doctor, I was spend my own money to drive several hours to go participate in a study there. So my doctor really said, it's up to you. I think your current treatment is working fine. He didn't really feel like it was necessary at the time, but he knew how I felt about the system based on that doctor. So I wasn't willing to travel back there for it anyways.
Interesting. Well, yeah, thanks for sharing that. One of the questions, we talked about the various sites, certainly clinicaltrial.gov, but as patients, how would you compare the advocacy group websites to the sponsors' websites, if you've looked at the sponsor websites for trials, in terms of the information they provide? I mean, any words to offer there?
I mean, I think the situation is different in Europe because we have much stricter rules that mean pharma companies can't interact with patients nearly as easily as they can in the US. But still, I think the trials, we don't, as advocacy groups, often give details of the trials. We refer to the pharma company's website, and then we try wherever possible to work with the company. I mean, there's been a lot of good stuff in the chat about straightforward, plain language. And we try and get everything put into plain language so that when a patient goes to the website, they'll get the information they require in the language they can understand.
That's true. You've also looked at the websites for advocacy groups and/or the sponsors. I'm sure there's a lot of rules and regulations that the sponsor is following. Okay. We do have, again, various questions here. We should try to relay the best, not the best ones.
Yeah, I can jump in with one, Wes. So again, for anyone that's in the audience, if you have anything in particular you'd like to ask the panelists, feel free to drop in the chat. We're going to try to get through as many as we can in the remaining 10 minutes, but we will also log the questions and try to get back to you with some of these answers. A question I guess this is actually a question to Wes, you and myself, but we'll include the panelists as well. We've noticed disparities in clinical trials to our brown as well as females, specific to cancer trials. Do we know specific ways to reach out to these communities to encourage recruitment? What barriers do you see specific to race, gender, and how can we overcome them? Definitely a very important topic. It was a very important topic in all the recent vaccines where recruiting minority populations was a challenge and was not just important for rigorous scientific, but was actually a requirement for the folks that were receiving US funding, that there was Hispanic population, African-American population, Native American populations were appropriately represented based on the US population. Historically, the sad fact is that part of that, I think, is an access challenge. We talked earlier about, the majority of trials being run in urban areas, that excludes folks in rural areas or maybe where there aren't hospitals that are run. The other challenge is a socioeconomic one. For some trials, participating is something that takes time away from your ability to provide for your family and work at your job. And so that has negatively impacted certain populations as well. So I think for trials to be successful moving forward, to make sure that we address some of these discrepancies, it's a dual factor of making sure that awareness is there that someone in rural Kansas or someone that's in an urban area, that those folks know about clinical research and know how to raise their hand if they are interested, whether it's through their doctor or their CVS or whatever it might be. And then the other thing is, when they do want to participate, how do you make sure that the person that has those 2 jobs, that has 5 kids at home, that they're able to do so in a sustainable way, that there's not 5 appointments, each month where they have to go on site, but some of it's maybe done in a more hybrid, decentralized trial type of way. Maybe they don't have to go to the hospital. Maybe they can go to their local doctor's office or their local pharmacy. There's definitely several things that can improve the access, but we still have a long way to go. The stats, sadly, are very heavy Caucasian moving forward. There's also, not to continue, but there's I think just historical things that we need to address as an industry and as a community. The horrible things that took place in the United States with I always mispronounce it, but the Tuskegee trial, and it takes a long time to rebuild trust with particular communities, and so making sure that continues to be top of mind and the right investments being made there is very critical. Wes or the panelists, any thoughts to add on that topic?
I think you answered the question, Mike.
I answered the question.
Really well too.
Oh, thank you.
There's a point. I'll give a shout out. Sherry Fox on the chat mentions, because the Intellis Clear Communications Task Force, formerly known as the Health Literacy Group, they did a study of diversity in clinical trials in conjunction with Seton Hall University, and Sherry has provided her email in the chat to provide a copy of those studies. So that they have some interesting findings about their research into the diversity. The other thing is, I think, shout out to Informa, because they work with so many different companies like Rare Patient Voice in terms of recruiting folks, that I think it helps getting more diverse population. They're not just using one method to find not panelists, but participants for clinical trials. So all these methods reach out to more people, can only help us.
Right. I think what's really interesting is the more people, the more everyone in the United States has exposed to clinical trials beyond just what's in the headlines of Moderna and things like that, but actually, through whatever medium is presented with what a phase trial is, what clinical research is, why we do it, how it's run, that awareness will go a long way. Most of in the stats, it just comes. And so I think historically pharmacists kind of doubled down and said, we're going to just try to go through physicians, or we're just going to on Facebook, or we're just going to kind of do a specific approach to trying to get our folks to aware of our trial. But the reality is there's lots in communication, and everyone's the same. Some people prefer radio or a billboard or an ad on their subway. Some want to talk to advocacy groups. So the more folks that are empowered and enabled to effectively talk about clinical research and spread the message, I think as a result, the industry will be more successful to deliver more trials and more new science faster. But it also the options when it comes for treatment for patients all around the world.
Yeah, I mean, I think on a lot of things you do need to recognize that many patients haven't had an education that makes them understand what research is or what science is and what the potential is. So there's a barrier there to be overcome at a very local level in a kind of peer-on-peer, peer-to-peer sort of way. We in Action for Pulmonary Fibrosis, my organization in the UK, we've started a whole cadre of research champions. So every support group now has a research champion who's being trained up so that they can both tell patients about what research is, bring them on board to make them interested, but also then actually provide the links to the research trials and support them so they don't drop out once they join. So, there's a lot of, I think, very rather sort of unglamorous local work like that needs to be done if we're going to really solve the problem.
Right. Like in a perfect world, the first time is learning about a phase 1/3 trial shouldn't be in those difficult moments after being diagnosed with a difficult condition. In a perfect world, we're all learning about it in high school. in a perfect world, there's all the pharmaceutical companies are coming together for a Super Bowl ad to do a big PSA to thank all the participant researchers and patients over the last year. And it's just more in the public conscience, and it's not just something that only affects a limited number of people at a certain point in their life.
That's what I was going to agree when you said about how do we get message out, was reaching groups that have big support group networks, because I'm very active in a young adult support group, because if you think about cancer research, there's pediatric and then there's your typical age, but you never see commercials on TV for young adult cancer. So being part of that group is really important to me. And we talk about the drugs that are out there. We talk about which ones we've taken, how it works, how it doesn't work, how we feel, how we don't feel. I mean, we talk to each other and build this network almost like a family. So we talk all about all the products that you guys make and what our opinions are on them. So I know an overwhelming majority of me finding out about a trial or some type of research has been through my support group, because that's our little network. So reaching out to groups that have really big support group networks, I think, because those people already each other, and then sharing information, bringing speakers into meetings, putting the information out that way, I think is a really good environment for sharing what's available, because that's where I get most of my information, not my doctor's office.
So I know we're on the end of the hour in a few minutes. Would love to give each of the panels just a chance to share any closing thoughts, audience. Could be whatever you're interested in sharing, or any asks you might have of the community. Steve, would love to start with you.
Okay, I mean, for me, or for us, I think the whole purpose is around getting seamless communication between clinicians and researchers, pharma companies and patients, and for patients to be recognized, trusted, and be driving much of the agenda. And I think what's happening now in the UK and partly in Europe as well, I know it is also with the FDA in the States, is encouraging pharma companies to involve patients from the very earliest stages of the research. So even before in-human trials, get patient organizations and patients involved at that stage. Make sure you talk to patients and involve them at every stage of the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 into phase 4 trials. And that's absolutely essential, I think, both because if you do that, you're more likely to get products that will get approved at the end of it. You won't have forgotten to do something. You'll be recognized as having talked to patients. But more important, you'll have a much better product because patients have been involved at every one of those stages. So I think it's all about communication. It's about trusting, developing trust, working together.
Sarah, anything you'd like to close out with?
So yeah, a lot of it is the communication. It's not just communication, but how all the information is communicated, making sure to reach as many people as possible, and then making everything accessible as much as possible. There's so much that's being done from home now, ever since COVID, telehealth. I right now I'm wearing a 24/7 EKG monitor that's being sent to, I have no idea where, but I don't need to be in the hospital for this EKG. It's a constant thing, and I'm doing it from home. And as much as possible, keeping things decentralized down to the patient, to the lay person, so that they can understand the process and then access it. That's just really important in getting the word out and the increase in the participation for clinical trials.
Thanks, Sarah. And then Ashley.
I would just say from a young adult perspective, we want your drugs and your medications to be on the market and approved and effective and in our hands as soon as possible, because our population has a lot of living to do. And we want to be part of the development of things that are going to keep us here for a long time. So we're behind you. I would agree with the other participants that please ask us about frequency. Is it an in-home? Is it an infusion? Can you get to the doctor's office 3 times a week versus 1 time a month? Ask us for our feedback, because we want this to move forward with you at the same time. We want more people here than gone. We've lost a lot of people that we care about, and we want cures for diseases and vaccines and things available. So the more information you can give us about what's available and the more you can involve us in the process, I think the more willing you are to see us come out and support you. Because trust us, you've done a lot in our spectrum to help us in 5-10 years that we're behind you 100%. Just stay behind us too.
Yeah, well said, Ashley. Well said.
So I want to thank our audience for joining us. I want to give a huge thank you to Sarah, Steve, and Ashley for spending your time and sharing your thoughts with us. And I want to thank my co-facilitator, Wes, for joining on today. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Everyone, I know that we're at time. Just one slide with our resources with all the organizations. And if we move on to the next slide, just a huge shout out to Rare Patient Voice, Informa Pharma Intelligence, all the panel members, just for a very informative, enlightening Q&A box, as well as a chat box. And as we wrap up, we will be sending out some post material and a post thank you with additional information on the webinar. So enjoy the rest of the day. And again, thank you very much for a very lively virtual conversation. Take care.